Hi, my name's Sana, and welcome to the Development Tools Podcast. On today's episode, my co host Eddie O'Connell and our esteemed colleague Richard McCarty unpack the performance formula, a tool that is so helpful in many leadership aspects, including coaching. Richard and Eddie expertly unpack the four elements of the formula. So, without further ado, let's listen.
So, hello everybody, and here we have Richard McCarty with us from OMT Global, our colleague, esteemed colleague, I should say, who has been using the performance formula for a long time to great effect. And we're going to ask Richard to tell us a little bit more about it. But first of all, before we kick off, Richard, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Over to you.
Very good, Eddie. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Before I joined OMT, I worked as an engineer and in business management as well. But I've been with OMT for over 27 years now, and I suppose I get a real buzz of working with high potential middle managers in leadership development. I also work with a number of senior leadership teams in strategy development and execution as well. So I've been around for a while.
Indeed, you have, and traveled the globe along the way. I can attest to that. But we've been on a few flights ourselves together.
In some fairly far-flung places, Eddie.
Indeed. And so, and maybe we'll have a few stories on a different podcast about some of those trips. But for today, though, we're talking about performance, and this is core to the work we do in OMT, developing people's performance, developing teams' performance, etc., etc. However, we want to talk about a performance formula in a minute. But what is a performance formula, Richard? If somebody's hearing this for the first time?
Yeah, I suppose the performance formula helps us understand what drives the performance of others. And the particular formula that we're working with was based on the original work of Whitten and Cameron. And it helps us to understand the performance of our team members. I tend to use it a lot in coaching conversations when we're helping individuals to become more self-aware and to take ownership of their own development.
And exactly, because when we have a performance formula that works, like this one, we have it in our back pocket. We're not reinventing the wheel every time we're sitting down having a conversation about performance. And it can be a real safety net, you could say, to help us guide our way through the conversation successfully. But Richard, tell us about the performance formula that we're talking about today. What are the key component parts?
All right. Well, I suppose being an engineer originally, I kind of like formulae myself, but this one is based around four parts. The first of which is clarity of expectations. The second of which is having the ability to deliver on those expectations. Thirdly, having the right attitude. And fourthly, that you're given the opportunity to take responsibility. So it's based on four parts. Performance is a function of clarity of expectations, ability, attitude, and opportunity.
So there are four elements. Performance equals clarity of expectation, ability, attitude, and opportunity. So these are the four elements that A, are parts of the formula, and B, will guide the conversation that you have when you're discussing performance. So Richard, can you go through each one by one for the listeners so that they can get a deeper understanding of the four component parts of the performance formula?
Sure thing, Eddie. The first of which is expectations. So you need to be crystal clear on what's expected of you in your role, to what standard you're meant to deliver, but also the contribution that you're making to the strategic agenda. You need to have line of sight between what it is that you're doing and what we're trying to achieve in the big picture. And the manager and the individual need to be fully aligned around those expectations.
So no assumptions, just be absolutely crystal clear.
Crystal clear.
And expectations.
You'd be amazed the number of times I ask people what's expected of them in their role, and then I talk to their manager, and the two are poles apart.
Absolutely. And how often we find that all the time, don't we? And this is critical in any performance conversation. So clarity of expectations is the first one. And then ability. What's ability made up of? Where does that take us?
So we tend to break ability down into three separate parts. The first of which is the skills, the knowledge, experience that you bring to bear. And that obviously helps you to deliver on expectations. But beyond that, you also need to have the right resources at your disposal. And by that, we mean the quality of the people reporting to you, the amount of time that you have available, quality of equipment, materials, processes, structures, and also the support of the manager as well. The final part of ability is aptitude. We know that there are some people, they're like round pegs in square holes. So you do need to have, that gift, that ability to deliver on those expectations.
Brilliant. So skills, knowledge, and experience are absolutely, and these are the areas that you will dive into when you're using the performance formula. But as you say as well, you're asking, do we have the resources? And also then the aptitude is a critical part of the ability side of the conversation. Then attitude, Richard, the third part. What's that made up of?
So I suppose attitude is wanting to deliver, wanting to do it. But I generally break this down into two parts. Somebody's level of commitment, but also their level of confidence. So by commitment, what I mean is their drive, their motivation, their want to get up in the morning, the energy that they bring to their work. But the second part of it is their levels of confidence. There's many a time I've met people that, may doubt themselves. And no matter how strong they are in terms of clarity of expectations, ability, if they doubt themselves, that can certainly undermine their performance. So two parts, commitment and confidence, I would say, in attitude.
And these are really, in terms of two very clear flags, you see and you investigate, you go deep into commitment and confidence. Brilliant. And then the fourth component, then, Richard, is opportunity.
So that simply means that you're given the opportunity to deliver, that your manager trusts you, that your manager delegates responsibility, but not just responsibility, the decision-making power that goes with that as well. So that's critical, that you are given that space to take that responsibility and deliver. Outside of that, we often talk about recognition for when you have delivered, and also exposure, if you like, to a wider audience. Because it's not just the performance today, it's who is watching you, what is your potential going forward as well. That's absolutely critical in your performance.
And what's really interesting about opportunity as well is when a manager learns about the formula and is using the formula in those conversations, then the manager can also hold a mirror up to himself or herself around opportunity. They might have talked about empowerment and autonomy, but then they realize maybe they haven't.
You're absolutely right, Eddie. And I would say it's not just opportunity, but the manager has a significant influence on a number of the factors that we've talked about. Exactly. Certainly in clarity of expectations, you would say that the manager has a lot of responsibility in that regard. Yeah. In terms of ability and skills, knowledge and experience, how well has a manager been coaching an individual? And even the attitude, is the environment right that enables that engagement, that drive, that energy? And of course, the opportunity is absolutely critical. Yeah. So the manager plays a very important part in terms of creating the right conditions to enable an individual to perform.
And I'm sure there are so many penny dropping moments during these conversations as managers develop the skill to use the formula, engage with the individuals as well in that process. They learn, as you just said, they're learning about themselves, but they're also helping their own team members to learn as well. Do you have any standout examples, Richard, where you've had thousands of these conversations through the years? Anyone that stands out that the listeners may relate to?
Yeah, I had a coaching conversation with somebody recently, and it was her first time in a people manager role. She was in the role probably about 12 months, I'd say, at this stage, but she didn't feel as if she was doing as well as she'd like to. And in fact, she felt a little bit snowed under, a little overwhelmed with her work. So I asked her to rate herself on a scale of 1 to 10 on her overall performance, and she gave herself a 6. So I said, right, let's put some meat on those bones. And when I started going through each of the elements of the formula, well, she was absolutely crystal clear on what was expected. She was very committed, and she did feel as if her manager trusted her and delegated responsibility. But what we did discover is that when we looked at resources, we discovered that her team members were relatively new. A lot of them were inexperienced, and she was actually very slow to delegate responsibility to them. And she probably delegated tasks rather than delegating responsibility. And she tended to hover a lot, looking over their shoulders. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? So when we talked it through, she realized that she wasn't really using the full potential of the team. And I suppose as a result of that, that kind of undermined her confidence somewhat as well, you know. So based on unearthing, I suppose, using the performance formula, you know, unearthing the root cause issues of why she had given herself a 6, we then put about putting together a development plan. And I suppose essentially what that entailed was figuring out what were the things that she could delegate responsibility for, but also it involved her coaching her direct reports as well. And in order that, you know, they could take that responsibility, figure things out for themselves. And what was very interesting about that was I met her again about 2 months afterwards for a progress update. And things had changed significantly for her.
Brilliant.
What she realized is that actually people were far more engaged as a result of her giving them responsibility. But also she realized that she had a little more headspace for her to think herself. And she could engage in more what I would call non-core activities, to look up and out a little bit more, to get involved in cross-functional projects, you know. So it was an absolute win-win for her. And really, it was the use of the performance formula that got us to those root cause issues, if you like.
That's brilliant. When you think about it, the conversation you had using the formula probably took, I don't know how long, half an hour, maybe, whatever the case may be.
Tops, I would say. About 30 minutes, I would say. The pennies were dropping, you know.
There you go. And look at the value then that conversation created subsequently around, as you say, now being able to, you've got a more empowered team who are using using their potential even greater, using their potential, and also she's able to look up and see things from in a different light. I mean, what an investment, what a return on investment for those 30 minutes.
Exactly.
And this is an investment that would keep on paying back over time, because now she's bought in, she sees it, and she knows how to use it herself.
Eddie, what I tend to see is that once people figure out what the root cause issue is, they always know how to fix it.
They do.
But actually what the performance formula does is it helps us to diagnose performance issues, you know, and I would say that 99% of the reasons that people aren't performing to their full potential is contained within that formula.
Okay.
But what we have to do is ask the right questions. We've got to probe. Tell me more about that. Can we explore that further? Can you describe the impact of that? You know, and doing it really through a coaching approach helps people to figure things out for themselves. Once they've figured out the root cause, they'll always be able to put a plan in place to address it.
Brilliant. And somebody listening to this now who are thinking about picking it up, I know we have material available to them where they can get more information, but who might be a little bit apprehensive about going into a conversation, a bit nervous about using it for the first time. What would you say to them, Richard, in terms of stepping into that area, or leaning in, as people say these days?
What I tend to find is that, if you make yourself vulnerable, people will trust you an awful lot more. And I always suggest to people, look, I've learned about this formula. I'm going to try using it within our conversations. I may not get it absolutely right, but well, let's go for it. And I think most people will forgive you for that, and they'll buy into it, because once we reveal something of ourselves and say that, look, I'm not 100% sure of this, people are much more inclined to trust you and go with you on the journey.
Brilliant.
And what I would also say is that, look, everybody is different. You may have your ideas as to what it is that's causing performance issues or whatever, but people know themselves best of all. So using the performance formula as a structure, get them to rate themselves against each of the elements of it and get them to explain why they gave that rating. Inevitably, the reasons will emerge as a result of that conversation.
Brilliant. There you go, folks. Thank you very much to Richard for his wise words of wisdom, as always. And it's over to you now to pick up the performance formula, get the value out of it. It is proven that it works. And thanks again, Richard.
Thanks a million, Eddie. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you to Richard for popping on to this episode of the podcast. To highlight some key takeaways, I'd like to quote Richard and say that what the performance formula does is identify the root causes, which is an excellent description. This tool is an investment that can be utilized to achieve so much. The breakdown Eddie and Richard provided was extremely helpful in aiding my own understanding of the formula, and I'm sure it was the same for you. Thanks for listening.